Welcome to the University of Pittsburgh's Health and Explainable AI podcast. I'm your host, Jordan Gospore, a health and science reporter. Join me as we cover advancements being made in health informatics and explainable AI for students, researchers, and healthcare practitioners interested in applications of artificial intelligence and machine learning. This podcast is produced by the University of Pittsburgh's Health and Explainable AI Research Laboratory at the University of Pittsburgh School of Health and Rehabilitation Sciences Department of Health Information Management. Headed by Ahmad Tafti, Pitt's HexAI Lab cultivates extramural collaborations with academic institutions both nationally and internationally through its research, educational contributions, and this podcast series.
Welcome back to the Pitt HexAI, a podcast series produced by the University of Pittsburgh Health and Explainable AI Research Laboratory. I'm Mythili Tirumalasetty, your host today. I'm going to guest host an interview with Anika, a research scientist with Northeastern University, specializing in the field of natural language processing at the Institute for Experiential AI, where Anika conducts research in the area of responsible AI for mental health.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Welcome, Anika. To get us started with, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us about your work at Northeastern?
So as you already said, my name is Annika, and I've been with EAI for a good year now. My work is predominantly in natural language processing, and I've focused specifically on suicide within the field of mental health before. And that touches really upon a couple of different things, including like sentiment analysis, social determinants of health, and lots of other bits and bobs. And that's what I do on a day-to-day basis.
Wow, that's really deep. So, Anika, maybe you can give us a use case and then explain for us what your work looks like behind the scenes and how you're leveraging deep learning methods into it.
Yeah, so one of the biggest use cases I've been working on for, unfortunately, many years now, can't believe how long it's been, is looking at social media data and specifically how people self-report mental health diagnoses and express their own suicidal thoughts, possibly, because there's a huge difference between, classifying risk versus intent versus ideation. And for that work back in the day, I'm what is called a pre-transformer baby. Before transformer networks in the form of BERT became really popular, I predominantly used something called recurrent neural networks, and that's the majority of my PhD was focused on that. But these days, with large language models and so many different transformer architectures, my work has also evolved. And more specifically, I have done some work on graph neural networks and large language models in, let's say, the last year or two. Yeah. And the main goal really is to understand suicide-related content as it's being discussed in the social media space.
Wow, that sounds fascinating. So, Anika, I wanted to know, can these methods be used to study pain, for example, in helping physicians and patients understand what brings patients into the hospitals and how severe their conditions are?
First of all, let me preface this. I'm not a medical professional. Okay, I have no medical training and I have no health sciences training. And so for me to answer those kind of questions, I always feel a little bit careful on how to word things, purely because there are people far more qualified than me to speak to those questions. And when we talk about pain specifically with in regards to mental health conditions, for example, I am sure there are ways of doing this. It's not necessarily my specific area of expertise, but one of the projects I'm currently looking at with a bunch of wonderful collaborators, one of them is an emergency room doctor, one of them is a social scientist, practicing nurse. We are currently pulling together a data set to analyze really emergency room visits and see whether there is bias, stigmatizations for people who may come in with a mental health issue and whether, they may get different types of medication, different type of treatment based on the biases of, their demographic, for example, which is really important. And so whilst I can't speak necessarily to whether we can treat or triage with the methods I use, I can confidently say that there's neural network-based work out there that surely looks into it.
So I was wondering, and Anika, correct me if I'm wrong, you have mentioned about collecting data in databases through factor database and graph databases. How useful are they for you in your research work, and what difference do you see from the databases that you used to work with before and now?
Yeah, so a couple of things here, really. The vast majority of data sets that I use, there's a distinction. So let me rewind that. I mentioned work on graph neural networks. Those are not necessarily graph databases. However, they can function on those. There are a methodology in terms of processing a graph or generating a graph using a neural network. Doesn't necessarily mean it's a database. However, what I can speak to is the dataset collection part and how that has changed over time. So dataset collection nowadays with, especially in the US, it's surely different. It has changed a lot in terms of privacy concerns, anonymity concerns, what you can collect where, specifically in the space of social media. I mean, Twitter has rolled back, Facebook has rolled back in order to protect user privacy, right? And so what we find now in the social media space is that we have quite a few outdated data sets and databases that are hardly accessible because, people can't share because of terms and conditions and, stuff you can't change as a researcher. And in terms of when we look at a real world use case scenario like clinical databases, they are so vast. I mean, there is no one size fits all approach. And I think the nice thing that we're getting to is that the compute power that we're having now to work on those databases is becoming better and better and more accessible via, cloud services, for example, or people investing in clusters. But yeah, things have changed. Data sets get bigger and there's more and more of it, but the domains shift a little.
Well, thanks for explaining that to our listeners, Anika. So you have mentioned that there's a lot of missing data in the databases and they're not, continual, and how that would impact the real world evidence. Is that what it is? And
yes, that's one other problem. So like when you have missing values in databases, that's a slightly different issue to having complete data sets going missing or being outdated. So for good reason, let's take an example. Let's say you want to understand social media behavior of users, right? And you collect data in 2016 and the rules, laws, and regulations are very different. You collect that data. For one, you can't make it publicly available, right? Because user privacy, not even de-identified. The way to share it would be via, for example, tweet IDs, but that's all gone down the drain now. X, or former Twitter, don't know how to properly refer to it these days, doesn't do that really anymore. There's a lot of open questions. And what we typically do is when we introduce a new task with a new data set, we benchmark, right? We want to understand how well different algorithms perform on that task using that data. And so now we are at a point where specifically for social media data, and it's threw everybody into chaos, not just myself, there's many, many people, where we can't really understand anymore what was going on. So we have reproducibility issues and reliability issues for data sharing, et cetera, et cetera. And that's one problem. The thing that you spoke to when we have missing data in the data set. So for example, you have a patient record and that patient, came in 20 times and certain elements of their EHR are missing. There are ways we would want to have that information because it could be potentially life-saving, right? Now, that is not the type of work I necessarily specialize in. However, I am aware that people look at how we can complete databases, how we can predict values for certain things or link entities together. So let's say value X wasn't filled in on visit 2, but it was filled in on visit 1. So maybe we can automatically link those two, and fill in the correct value. However, very different problems, just as a heads up.
so, Anika, taking up on your mention of regulatory aspects of the data and databases and also the privacy concerns, which is one of the focuses of Pitt Health and Explainable AI, I wanted to know your thoughts on the focus of explainable AI. What's your take on explainability and where do you see advances being made in the field?
Yeah, so explainable AI is an interesting one because it's obviously closely linked to responsible AI, right? And I'm in a responsible AI group, so I have to have knowledge of it and be aware of the methods and techniques that we use. And whilst they're closely linked with each other, there are some key differences, right? In explainable AI, what we generally speaking try to understand is why a neural network, often known as a black box, makes a certain decision. So we have an input of a diagnosis maybe, and we get a prediction out, and we don't really understand with a lot of the networks how, why, when, at which point in the network that decision was made. And that's really the explainable element of it, right? And it influences responsible AI and how we build use cases and what we should or shouldn't do and how it fits in with policy, regulation, and the legal system. So in responsible AI, you really look at ethicists and philosophers, medical and health philosophers, for example, who try to understand how to safely implement technology where we don't know how it's making decisions. And that's the reality of it. At the moment, we still don't know how most of the neural networks make decisions. Are we working towards that? Is that an active field of research? 100%. People are pushing really, really hard for it because it is going to make our lives a lot easier. However, it is an incredible heavy lift, right? When we think about the multiple matrix multiplications alone that are made over hundreds of hidden layers at the bare minimum, getting that understanding and getting an insight into that is, I don't think anybody's going to solve that in the next year, to be honest. And so the one thing we can do is look at it from a responsible AI approach alongside of that to say, okay, so if we use this algorithm in a clinical setting to triaging patients, for example, how can we do so in that the algorithm triages in an unbiased way, that it does so fairly, and that there is maybe human in the loop decision making, right? And that's like a very important adjacent, point to make in the context of explainable AI. I hope that answered your question.
You did definitely answer my question. And what's more interesting is with every industry using AI so intensely, it's every industry nowadays is just implementing AI in any of their activities, their research and everything. So for them to be responsible and adapting to the responsible version of the AI is very significant, in the world that we are going or headed towards right now.
And that's the hope. The hope is that industry is going to catch up. And I see the efforts that are being made in industry. And we're not just talking, like healthcare necessarily, where in Europe we may call it the public sector because healthcare is more of a public sector issue. But we're talking about finance, we're talking about retail, we're talking about policing, legal systems. And the idea would be that, yes, we have far more implementations, guidelines, and regulations to help people utilize artificial intelligence. Is that the reality we live in right now? Not necessarily. I mean, one very recent example you may have heard in the news is a pregnant woman was falsely accused of a car hijacking because she was inaccurately classified as the person who committed the crime, and she was arrested. She was obviously, released after the issue came to light, but that shouldn't have happened in the first place. That should have never been the case where we have an algorithm being responsible for the fact that someone gets arrested, never mind gets the wrong clinical treatment, there are so many things that could happen here. So yes, I agree with you. Ideally, we'd be there. I don't think we're quite yet there yet, that way around.
Yeah, definitely. And it is so unfortunate, the incident that you mentioned, but I think it's a lesson to all of us that we cannot blindly adapt to the AI. In fact, we all have to be responsible in what ways we are adopting it and try to not go beyond our limitations and see if we are going towards it in an ethical way. So thanks for that. And Anika, we always ask, would you like to give our listeners any research idea in the field of explainable AI or responsible AI?
So there's a couple of things really. I think before I give my idea out, I want to make very clear that in responsible or explainable AI, you always have to work on average in an interdisciplinary team, especially when you go towards an application area. So explainable AI in health, ideally you work with some health professionals. So whatever project you're working on in explainable AI actually has a real world application and no unintended consequences, right? That you may not foresee because you're not from that other domain. That being said, there's lots to do, specifically in natural language processing. And I can name actually a few things and people can pick from those. Mainly because something I've mentioned earlier. So we have in natural language processing this idea of understanding bias and social bias specifically in the language we use, right? And even our large language models, ChatGPT, hugely biased, towards certain groups, minorities, etc., etc. One thing that we see in natural language processing, and I'm not saying this is a 100% case, but it is a trend, is that the vast majority of work is only on English language data sets, language models, only English. That's not gonna, help people who speak Danish, for example, or who speak, I don't know, Swahili, Finnish. We can go across the board here, right? And the other thing is that we as people have intersectional identities. So I may present as a woman and I am white, but I may also be, queer. I'm not, but I may be, right? And that leaves me open to very different, biased language to compare to just a white woman. Obviously, there are other examples, if you're a Black man and you are disabled, the examples could go, on and on and on. And anybody who would like to learn more about this, Kimberly Crenshaw is your reading here. And what we are looking for, hoping for, is that we're diversifying the methods, tools, and resources really in natural language processing that mean we have more diverse languages being worked on other than English, more diverse social biases worked on rather than just, for a woman who presents as, white, for example. So yeah, I think there's plenty to do in that area. And one thing that I think is really, really important is community engagement. And it needs to come from the community. And so, yeah, if students want to work on that, I think that'd be great because we really need a diversification.
Those are such cool and amazing ideas. I hope our listeners take on that.
We'll find out.
Yeah. And that's certainly what's happening in Pitt HexAI too. We are trying to collaborate with orthopedic surgeons, and our computer science experts are being involved along with them, are closely interacting with them to bring out some amazing outcomes and trying to diagnose some conditions earlier on. So I hope many people do that cross-functional team and work up to drive a solution to many problems out in the world. Anika, before we let you go, would you like to give out a shout out on any of the current projects that you're involved in at Northeastern?
Yeah, I'm not going to just shout out myself. I think I'm going to also highlight some of my incredible colleagues. The Institute for Experiential Artificial Intelligence is a very young institute. And we have some really great groups and working groups around, AI plus health. The Responsible AI group by Chansu Chana, who is very well-renowned ethicist and philosopher doing incredible work in responsible AI alongside Professor Baez Yates. And then also we have our NLP group who work tirelessly on various issues with regards to low resource machine learning translation. So there's lots going on. And given my intersection of NLP, mental health, and doing so in a responsible way, I sit in all of those groups. So yeah.
Well, I certainly am looking forward to more and more study of yours because you sound like a very interesting and cool person. So it's been a pleasure talking to you today, Anika. Thank you so much. And amazing how you've put so many complex things that a normal listener wouldn't understand in a way that they can. That's really cool of you. Thank you so much and have a great day.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to hearing more from you in your podcasts. Thank you.
Thanks everyone for tuning in and for following the show. The Health and Explainable AI podcast is produced by the University of Pittsburgh's Health and Explainable AI Research Laboratory at University of Pittsburgh School of Health and Rehabilitation Sciences Department of Health Information Management. I'm Jordan Gaspore. Thanks for listening.